The Palestinian resistance group Hamas says that there will be no ceasefire until the Israeli siege on Gaza is lifted. The Israelis step up attacks against the Gaza Strip, killing over 125 civilians in less than 24 hours. And the leader of the Islamic Revolution in Iran calls for unity in the Muslim world in the face of Israeli aggression against Palestinians. Hello there, you're watching Ali Tijah World News and I'm Fatima Bassem. Well, reports of a humanitarian ceasefire in the Gaza Strip have been squashed earlier. The Israeli media cited an unnamed senior Israeli official as saying that the Israelis and Palestinians have agreed in principle to a ceasefire. However, it later retracted that statement. Both sides were said to be holding emergency meetings before the Palestinian resistance group Hamas released a statement. Hamas's military commander said that a ceasefire will not take effect unless the siege on Gaza is lifted. Mohammed Diaf, the leader of Hamas's armed wing, went on to say that the group will not accept any compromises. Earlier, the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has asked for U.S. help in trying to broker a ceasefire in the besieged Gaza Strip.
Last night we talked, and the Prime Minister talked to me about an idea and a possibility of a ceasefire. He raised it with me, as he has consistently. He has consistently said that he would embrace a ceasefire that permits Israel to protect itself against the tunnels and obviously not be disadvantaged for the great sacrifice that they've made in order to be able to protect themselves thus far. So the bottom line is that we are working very carefully and I think thoughtfully.
Israeli aggression against the Gaza Strip has entered its 22nd day, with Israeli forces stepping up their attacks from the air, sea and land, while killing at least 125 Palestinians in the span of under 14 hours. The worst of the Israeli onslaught came in the form of a massacre in Khan Yunis, where 17 members of the same family, including 11 children, were dug out of the rubble. Israeli tanks also shelled Brage Camp in southern Gaza, killing at least 11 of its residents, including 3 children. 5 members from one family have also been killed in Rafah city, where Israeli warplanes launched several deadly airstrikes. Medical sources have said that the death toll among Palestinians has climbed to 1,210, with over 7,000 injured. Meanwhile, a leader from the Palestinian Democratic Front, along with his wife and children, was killed by an Israeli airstrike on Khan Yunis in Gaza. The assassination came hours after an attack targeted the home of top Hamas leader and former Palestinian Prime Minister Ismail Haniyeh in Gaza City Shati refugee camp. Let's cross over to our Gaza correspondent Balsam Al-Atrash, who is standing by for us. Now, Balsam, the Israelis seem to be setting a record in Gaza every day. Is it about to get a lot bloodier there?
Well, it apparently seems like that, as the Israeli warplanes has just threw the flare lights that they throw every night in order for them to expose the area, light it up, and then begin to strike. Areas all across the northern parts of Gaza Strip, eastern parts as well, have witnessed these lights in the skies, which means that the party has begun and that the Israeli side is going to start striking right now. Also in the areas of central Gaza Gaza Strip, and in the south, the situation is similar. But what adds to more to that is that since the early hours of this morning, the Israeli air raids and strikes in those areas, in particular in the south, did not stop. All day, the Israeli forces have been striking the areas multiple times, especially the areas of Garara, Bani Sela, Khuza'a, Rafah in the southern areas of Gaza Strip. A large number of Palestinians were killed in that area. 125 Palestinians were killed overnight. But in the south itself, there has been more than 70 Palestinians killed from these Israeli air raids, tank shelling, bombing, and so on. Also, in the middle area of Gaza Strip, the central area, there has been ongoing clashes for about 2 days now. Sounds can be heard, sounds of bombing and shelling can be heard all the time, overnight in the eastern border of Gaza Strip, which indicates that there's Israeli militants and Palestinian resistance groups engaged in gunfire in that area. In the area of Sha'if, Shijaiya, Zaytun, and Beit Hanun, these are the eastern and eastern northern area of Gaza Strip, also witnessed heavy shelling by the Israeli forces, especially the one that had led to a massacre in Jabalia area, which killed around 15 people. 11 of them are from the same family, a man, his wife, all of his children, and his mother. They were all killed by an Israeli shelling to their home in Tel Zatar in Jabalia area. Now, the current situation, we are still hearing bombing, shelling, air raids. We are trying to keep track of them, but since the Israeli Ministry of Defense yesterday announced that it is going to intensify its operation, it seems like the Israelis are intensifying even more and more. The night hours carry a lot for the Palestinians. They carry a lot of bombing, shelling, air raids, and airstrikes. Also throughout the day, the Israeli warplanes also hit residential buildings, the Ministry of Finance, Prime Minister Ismail Haniyeh's home.
All right, Balsam, let's go to London and speak with Marcel Cartier, a human rights activist and a London-based journalist. Marcel, we're hearing these conflicting reports about the potential agreement of a ceasefire between both sides, but on the ground, fighting hasn't stopped. Is this the storm before the calm?
Well, I don't think that the United States or Israel really have any intention of entering into a ceasefire, at least not a fair one. I mean, the Hamas demand to end the siege is a most basic humanitarian demand and is clearly something that the Zionist entity is not intent on actually doing. Israel, of course, was created based on ethnic cleansing. It maintains itself based on this system of colonialism and ethnic cleansing. And I think what we're seeing now is the attempt to impose a final solution to the Palestinian problem, as they would put it, to liquidate the Palestinian resistance. I think it's ridiculous to frame this as a situation of equal violence. I don't think that the violence of the colonizer and the violence of the colonized should ever be compared. And I think that even if you look at United Nations resolutions, colonized people have the right to defend themselves by any means necessary, including through armed struggle. So what we have is the intensification of a genocidal campaign on behalf of the Israelis, principally backed by the United States. I mean, we can't really separate the two countries because as an American myself, I know that the United States is bankrolling Israel to the extent of over $8 million a day. So when John Kerry came out in the media last week and he said that we're willing to give, I think it was close to $50 million in aid to the people of Gaza, many Americans looked at that and said, oh, look, we're doing something positive for the people of Palestine. We actually are showing that we care. But in reality, that number is less than 1 week of military aid to Israel. So we see, again, the United States basically pulling the strings here and, asserting its imperial dominance across the globe at the expense of countless men, women, and children dying on the ground in Gaza.
Yes, and Bassam, now the Israelis are not only targeting civilians, they also, the only power plant in Gaza has been closed. How are Palestinians dealing with this blackout?
Well, I don't know if you can see behind me, but behind me, as you can see, the entire Gaza Strip has been in total blackout since early hours of this morning as the Israeli warplanes hit the only power plant in the Gaza Strip, leading to the total cutoff in power on the entire Gaza Strip. Note that since beginning of this war, there has been deliberate targeting to power feeders and power generators all across the Gaza Strip, which led to a shortage and cut in power in a lot of areas across the Gaza Strip. The Palestinians tried to cope with 20% electricity and power across the day, but today there has been zero electricity or zero power provided throughout Gaza Strip. Hospitals are relying on generators that need fuel. Actually, fuel is being banned from entering the Gaza Strip. A lot of fuel stations, petrol stations have closed them, and also they cannot provide any other source for power. So by the cut of this power, we can announce that Gaza Strip is a disaster zone. In this minute, it is a disaster zone with no power, no water, no cellular networks, actually. Also, the communication network in areas cannot be reached. We are trying to call people who are in Bureij, in Khan Yunis, in Rafah, in order to ask them what is going on. We cannot even reach them since there's no cell phone communication. The power here in Gaza, the power problem is a situation that is leading to a catastrophe, is leading to a major humanitarian crisis in the area.
Yes, Marcel, you heard there that Gaza at the moment is a disaster zone. But do you think the fact that the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, he asked for US help to reach a truce, this is a sign that the Israelis can no longer take any losses from their side?
True. Palestinians are used to this kind
of... with the loss of...
Yes, Marcel.
I'm sorry, I missed that question.
I was asking you if the Israelis, they are feeling the losses that are felt from the resistance.
Well, I think you see in a number of protests that have taken place within Israel itself, as we saw in the United States, the war in Iraq, which is why I think that you haven't seen any major protests, for example, when it comes to U.S. intervention in Libya or potential U.S. intervention in Syria, or the very real U.S. intervention that's happening by proxy in Syria, is that every time that you would have U.S. boots on the ground, you would have a much bigger anti-war movement. People would actually be out in the streets demonstrating because they were scared that their fathers or their sons were going to be sent off to war and die. But when they do it via proxy, for example, when the United States props up entities like the Free Syrian Army, then you don't have any widespread resistance to war. So I think you have the same phenomenon happening within Israel, where the Israeli entity, 1948 occupied Palestine, as I would refer to it as, because they're keenly aware that their sons, daughters may be going off to war and, may be dying. And this is, of course, something that, strikes close to home. So the more losses that are incurred, that would probably be the way that this conflict is going to come to an end sooner rather than later.
All right, Marcel Cartier, human rights activist and a London-based journalist, thank you for speaking to Ali Tijat. Now, Bassam, I would like to ask you finally, very briefly, the Al-Qassam brigades, they thanked Gazans for standing by the resistance. What is the mood among Palestinians as the assault is in its 22nd day?
Yes, true. Palestinian public are in full support for the Palestinian resistance, and the Palestinian resistance statement today that was carried out by Mohammed Al-Daif, thanking the Palestinian people for their support and for their steadfastness in this difficult situation, and for them standing by the resistance, and also saying that yes, we do not care what the Israelis do, but this war is going to end or lift the siege and meet our conditions conditions. The Palestinian resistance thanked them today very much. The Palestinian public here are used to this kind of wars. Every single time they enter a war and the war ends with no demands being met for the Palestinians, no siege being lifted, they have to do something currently, maybe just stand a little bit longer, wait and be patient. Maybe this time this war will end with a more better solution for the Palestinians and their conditions will be met. Especially that the Palestinians have been living in a miserable situation, under siege, blockade for more than 8 years now. They were patient enough. This time they were going to sacrifice their sons, sacrifice their homes in order for their freedom and for order to support the resistance groups and assure them that they are behind them throughout the way.
Yes, and has humanitarian aid been able to pass through the Rafah border crossing?
No, actually not. No humanitarian aid is entering. If there has been humanitarian aid that has entered, it was something really simple, primitive tools, maybe just some kind of food items. Actually, some of the aid that has entered from the Egyptian side, the food was ruined. The Palestinian people could not use it since it has been standing on the border for a long time in the sun, so the food was expired and not good for use. Also, other humanitarian aids that had entered were primitive, and that doctors in the hospital need something more sophisticated in order to deal with the kind of wounds and injuries from this Israeli aggression. Israelis are using weapons that are banned, internationally banned. They are using heavy kind of weapons on the Palestinians. They need sophisticated machines, they need sophisticated medical tools and supplies. Also, regarding other humanitarian aid, such as food items, such as other kind or sort of tools that the Palestinians use in their daily homes, like hygiene material, cleaning material, all of these are missed out in the Gaza Strip. They are in deep shortage and they cannot find any kind of crossing that enters this kind of items. Before, the Israelis had stricken the tunnels between the Gaza Strip and the Egyptian side, these items used to enter through the tunnels. But after a Sisi came by and ruined all the tunnels, Gaza has been in complete blockade with no humanitarian aids entering. Also, the sewage problem here is devastating. There is complete areas where the sewage is being blocked or being flooded with sewage water. Clean water cannot reach any kind of areas. As I mentioned, communication has been cut off. Power, water pipelines means that Gaza is going to a stone era here, and that we need an intervention. We need humanitarian aids. Doctors are appealing for this kind of support from the international world. They are asking to open the borders, but officially Egypt saying that they did open the border, but on the ground is something different. The politicians in the political side say whatever they want to say. Today they were announcing that there was going to be a ceasefire, talks about a ceasefire, talks about a truce. Palestinian Authority also said that there was talks between. Hamas denied all of that. On the political side, they are talking a lot, but on the ground, all we can hear is shelling, killing, bombing, airstrikes, air raids, closed borders, besieged enclave, which means that the situation is different than or more than I can even describe.
All right, Bansam Alatrash, our Gaza correspondent, thank you for giving us the latest. Well, as you heard there earlier, the Gaza Strip sole power plant has been forced to shut down following more Israeli shelling. The closure of the plant has caused a total blackout across the coastal strip.
Hearing the thunderous sound of a bomb exploding, or even seeing the ball of fire it creates, is not a new phenomenon in Gaza, where the Israeli offensive entered its 22nd day. Previously, hospitals, schools, mosques, and even UN refugee centers were struck by Israeli warplanes and tanks. Now, it was the turn of Gaza's only power plant. Israeli tank fire hit the fuel depot of the power plant, resulting in a huge fire which billowed into the sky over Gaza, cutting electricity to 1.8 million people living in the besieged strip.
Strikes on the power plant hit the fuel tanks. Approximately 3 million cubic liters worth of diesel fuel. It is now engulfed in strong flames. We in the civil defense evacuated all the employees, and we are now in the process of controlling the fire. We still don't know what sort of effort it would require to extinguish it. We are simply in the process of controlling it.
But controlling the fire is not the issue. Whether the plant will be operable afterward is a concern for everyone in Gaza.
I would like to say to the world that this was a humanitarian plant that served the people, therefore its existence helped people, life, hospitals and the normal simple life of the people of Gaza. So striking the plant in this way means that we lost the electricity supply, which we were relying on even if it only supplied 3 hours worth a day.
An 8-year-long Israeli siege on Gaza has led to frequent shortages of basic necessities, including the fuel needed to run the plant. Now that the plant has been shut down, Gaza faces a huge humanitarian catastrophe as a result of the Israeli collective punishment of Palestinians.
Well, in retaliation to the strikes, Palestinian resistance groups have killed 5 Israeli soldiers during peace clashes south of Nahal Oz near the Gaza Strip. This footage, released by the Al-Qassam brigades, purports to show the moment resistance fighters emerged from an underground tunnel and attacked an Israeli soldier. Hamas fighters fired an anti-tank missile at an army position, hitting a row of barracks and killing all troops inside. The operation came after the group launched a salvo of rockets on Tel Aviv, Sderot, as well as Ashkelon and Ashdod. The Israelis have thus far admitted to losing 53 soldiers and 3 settlers during more than 3 weeks of operations in the Gaza Strip. Social media has become a useful tool for those looking to aid Gaza's residents during the relentless Israeli onslaught. A group of Palestinian youths are now using online media to organize shipments of medical and humanitarian aid bound for the Gaza Strip.
A group of young Palestinians, unaffiliated with any political faction or institution, have organized several aid shipments to assist residents of the Gaza Strip, left battered by 3 weeks of merciless Israeli bombardments. Dozens of young Palestinian volunteers from the occupied West Bank set up pages on social media sites and were able to collect money to buy medical supplies, food, clothes and other humanitarian items to send to Gaza.
Given the latest events during our brothers and sisters in the Gaza Strip have been subjected to massacres by Israelis, we saw that we could do something, collect medicine, food items, clothes and anything we can. This is how we came up with the Qawarib Gaza campaign.
The campaign, entitled Qawarib Gaza, Arabic for Ships to Gaza, quickly became popular among Palestinians eager to help the impoverished coastal enclave. Organizers say the campaign became popular among Palestinian youths who rushed to become volunteers, as well as individuals and companies who either donated money or are helping transport the aid trucks.
This is one of the ways that work in helping our people, which makes me feel good. Instead of heading to the checkpoint to get shot, here I feel like I can do something positive.
The main UN agency in Gaza, UNRWA, said more than 167,000 displaced Palestinians had taken shelter in its schools and buildings, following repeated calls by the Israelis for civilians to evacuate whole neighborhoods ahead of military operations. One of the most joyous days in the Muslim calendar, the holiday of Eid al-Fitr, was marked on Monday by tears and sorrow in Gaza.
The leader of the Islamic Revolution in Iran, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, urged the Islamic world to arm Palestinians and counter what he called the Israeli genocide in the Gaza Strip. Ayatollah Khamenei made the remarks in a speech marking the Muslim festival of Eid al-Fitr at the Imam Khomeini Mosque in Tehran.
The people in Gaza are surrounded from all sides. They're in a small territory with the sea closed off, the land closed off, all their borders closed off. Their drinking water, their electricity, and all their infrastructure is under threat. And no one is helping them in the face of attacks from the enemy. These people are facing a heavily armed and merciless enemy in the shape of the Zionist regime and its cruel and filthy leaders. They are bombing the people in Gaza night and day without any hesitation or consideration, but the people are standing firm and resisting. The American president has issued a fatwa that the resistance in Gaza has to be disarmed. It's obvious why they want to disarm them. It's to stop the resistance from striking against the criminal acts that are being taken against it. We call on the world, and especially the Islamic world, to support and arm the Palestinian nation.
Countries with Muslim populations are celebrating Eid al-Fitr, marking the end of the holy Muslim fasting month of Ramadan. Iran is no exception. Millions of people in the Islamic Republic have turned out for communal prayers, including here in the capital, Tehran.
Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar.
The Eid al-Fitr prayers, like every year, are led by the leader of the Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, in the capital's Grand Musalla Mosque. Sayyid Khamenei also delivered a speech on the occasion and wished all Muslims everywhere a great Eid al-Fitr holiday. This scene is usually common here since the establishment of the Islamic Republic of Iran after the victory of the revolution back in 1979. This year Ramadan happened in Iran a day later than most Muslim countries, and that's because according to Islamic law, the Muslim lunar month of Ramadan's end is only declared after the new moon crescent is sighted. This day also marks the Islamic lunar month of Shawwal. As a tradition, on this day in Iran, gifts in the form of money are handed to family members from one another. Also, according to Islamic law, Muslims who are able must put aside an amount of money to be given as alms to those who are in desperate need. The Eid al-Fitr holiday is 3 days including the weekend in Iran. Many will take advantage of this time and spend the next couple of days visiting loved ones or sightseeing Iran's many tourist destinations. Reporting for Al-Ittijah TV, Hussein Dabash, Tehran.
Well, you're watching Al-Ittijah World News, still to come. The West steps up its sanctions regime against Moscow as Kiev widens its military operations against pro-Russian rebels. Welcome back to AEE TV World News. Here's a reminder of our top stories. The Palestinian resistance group Hamas says that there will be no ceasefire until the Israeli siege on Gaza is lifted. The Israelis step up attacks against the Gaza Strip, killing over 125 civilians in less than 24 hours. And the leader of the Islamic Revolution in Iran calls for unity in the Muslim world in the face of Israeli aggression against Palestinians. As Iraq marks Eid al-Fitr, security was heightened across Baghdad amid the ongoing violence engulfing the northern parts of the country. Wissam al-Bayati reports from the Iraqi capital.
The Iraqi people have received Eid al-Fitr with heavy deployment of the Iraqi security forces. Under tight security measures, thousands of Iraqi families headed to the parks in the capital Baghdad to enjoy Eid al-Fitr celebrations. According to the Baghdadis, the heavy presence of the Iraqi security forces provide the sense of security and enabled them to move freely among Baghdad's neighborhoods fearlessly.
The Iraqi security personnel are dealing with the people in a very professional way, and in return we should be cooperative, since the security procedures need time.
Many others praised the efforts of the Iraqi Defense, Interior and National Security Ministries in securing Eid al-Fitr.
Since I left my house to come to the park, I noticed that the security forces are doing their best to provide a safe environment during the Eid. I feel safe and I am enjoying my time without fear.
Baghdad's Military Operations Center has announced that it has finalized the deployment of the security units, and the security plan for Eid al-Fitr has been activated to include more than 8,000 security personnel to secure the celebrations.
The required preparations have been taken and tight security measures were put in place to secure the celebrations of Eid al-Fitr. We urge the people to show their full cooperation with the security forces during the celebrations.
According to the Iraqi government, the Iraqi Defense, National Security, Interior, Transportation, Tourism, Health and Electricity ministries are taking part in the security plan during Eid al-Fitr al-Mubarak.
The Iraqi people have agreed that the insecurity in Iraq will never deprive them of holding the celebrations of Eid al-Fitr al-Mubarak. They say that the heavy presence of the Iraqi security forces has provided the sense of stability during the celebrations. Wissam al-Bayati, Al-Ittijah, Baghdad.
Well, a new stomach-turning report reveals that militants from the so-called Islamic State, which control large parts of Iraq and Syria, are now recruiting single and widowed women for the pleasure of its fighters. The recent revelations have sparked an international outcry over the extensive human rights violations being carried out by the group.
The Wahhabi wizard seems to have more tricks up his sleeve. The Islamic State, which advocates public stoning for adultery, has opened the ironically dubbed Marriage Bureau, which forces women to marry IS fighters in territory they control in Syria and Iraq. The British-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said that the extremist group's office is operating from Al-Bab, a town in Aleppo province of northern Syria, for single women and widows who are being forced into arrangements with IS fighters. The monitoring group, which relies on a network of spies active on the ground, said women were being ordered to provide their names and addresses, which would then be used to direct militants to their homes. The IS has also expanded into tourism, taking fighters on honeymoons and civilians to visit other parts of its caliphate. Running twice-weekly tours from Syria's Raqqa to Iraq's Anbar, IS buses fly the group's black flag and play militant songs throughout the journey. Human rights activists are concerned over the systematic abuses of women's rights under the ruthless reign of the so-called Islamic State, which includes forced marriages. IS-led militants have also been accused of committing gross human rights violations and war crimes in Syria and Iraq, such as rape, summary executions, mass kidnappings, and massacres.
Meanwhile, a U.S. judge has signed an order to seize an oil tanker off the Texas coast from the Iraqi Kurdistan region. The order was made acting on a request from the central government in Baghdad. Iraqi authorities laid claim to the cargo, saying it was sold by the regional government of Kurdistan without permission from Baghdad, adding that such deals amount to smuggling. Following the recent capture of a number of energy fields by militants in Iraq and Syria, the UN Security Council backed a Russian initiative to ban any form of oil trade with Islamist groups operating in the region.
As the militant group, formerly known as the Islamic State in Iraq and Levant, gains ground in Syria, a significant portion of its financial resources is coming from the crude oil it sells on the black market. Accordingly, oil fields have become prime targets in the fight for territorial control, as the urgency to combat the black market sales of oil becomes ever more pressing in international circles. The United Nations Security Council warned in a joint statement that buying oil from groups such as the Islamic State and Jabhat al-Nusra, which are fighting in Iraq and Syria, could lead to sanctions. Russia presented the statement in late June, seeking to clamp down on middlemen who are selling the oil from Islamist-controlled areas. The Russian-backed statement strongly condemns any engagement in direct or indirect trade of oil from Syria involving terrorist groups and reminds that such engagement constitute financial support for entities which are designated by the UN Security Council as terrorists. Larger shipments of crude, some of them from Syria, namely from the oil-rich Deir az-Zor province, are also sold via smugglers to Iraqi businessmen or Turkish traders. The monopoly over fuel in the territory it has captured gives the Islamic State leverage over other armed factions who could threaten its dominance in northern Iraq. Militant groups such as the Islamic State and the al-Nusra Front have seized oil fields and pipelines to bankroll their offensives. The control of oil facilities and selling oil-derived products also supports their recruitment efforts and strengthens their operational capability to organize and carry out terrorist attacks.
Libyan forces battled Islamist militants with rockets and warplanes for control of an army base in the eastern city of Benghazi, after at least 30 people were killed in overnight fighting.
Intense fighting in Benghazi and battles between rival militias in the capital Tripoli have pushed Libya deeper into chaos, after 2 weeks of the fiercest violence since the 2011 civil war ousted Muammar Gaddafi. At least 30 people were killed overnight, as a huge blaze was still raging at a fuel depot near Tripoli's airport, while a Libyan paramilitary fighter jet crashed in the eastern city of Benghazi during fighting with Islamist groups. Meanwhile, authorities said the Italian government and national energy giant Eni were to send 7 firefighting planes to help combat an inferno that has been blazing since Sunday at the oil depot on the outskirts of the capital. 2 weeks of fighting between militias for control of Tripoli airport and between Islamists and a former general in Benghazi has killed scores of people and prompted several countries to urge their citizens to leave Libya.
Hashmat Karzai, the cousin of Afghan President Hamid Karzai, was killed in Kandahar city. Hashmat was a campaign manager for presidential candidate Ashraf Ghani in the southern province of Kandahar. He was killed at his home when a suicide bomber blew himself up as visitors arrived to celebrate the Eid holiday. Following their meeting at the State Department in Washington, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and his Ukrainian counterpart called for an end to the fighting in eastern Ukraine. The U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry also said that additional economic sanctions will be imposed on Russia if President Putin does not intervene to calm the crisis in the east.
And as President Poroshenko has made clear repeatedly, and as Foreign Minister Klimkin reiterated to me just a few minutes ago, the Ukrainians are ready to accept a mutual ceasefire now, not in the future, now. And they have proposed a peace plan that includes serious and substantive dialogue with the Russian-backed separatists, with international participation, because they understand that that is the only way that this crisis is going to come to an end. President Putin can make a huge difference here if he chooses to. And we and our European partners will take additional measures and impose wider sanctions on key sections of the Russian economy if that is what we must do. We hope that it will not be necessary. And if Russia continues to go down this path, however, Russia will leave the international community with no choice.
Because what counts and what is critical is reaching the bilateral ceasefire with the aim of restoring the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Of course, we need a critical progress. We need a breakthrough on hostages. We need to release hostages as soon as possible. And it's also the issue of human dignity.
Western governments and their partners in Kiev have stepped up efforts to exert more pressure on Moscow and pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine. While Kiev intensifies its military campaign against rebels, the European Union has expanded its sanctions regime against the Kremlin.
The battle for Ukraine is claiming new victims by the day. On the economic front, the crisis in the former Soviet state has strained ties between East and West to its lowest point since the Cold War, and it only looks set to get worse. Only days after slapping sanctions against a number of Russian individuals and companies, the European Union is now aiming for the heart of the Kremlin's military and economic sectors. The EU agreed to impose asset freezes and travel bans against 4 close business associates of Russian President Vladimir Putin, as well as 4 firms.
European leaders clearly shared this assessment and a determination to act. We expect the European Union to take significant additional steps this week, including in key sectors of the Russian economy. In turn, and in full coordination with Europe, the United States will implement additional measures itself.
These tougher Phase 3 measures, as opposed to the so-called Phase 2 asset freezes and travel bans, are meant to limit Russian access to European financial markets. The 28-member bloc also plans to ban future arms sales to Moscow, restrict the export of goods with both defense and civilian applications, and clamp down on technology transfers, especially in the energy sector. But the West's energy sector does not share the sentiment. British Petroleum, for one, is warning of the potential consequences should its Russian partners be targeted by sanctions. If further international sanctions are imposed on Rosneft, or new sanctions are imposed on Russia, this could have a material adverse impact on our relationship with and investment in Rosneft, our business and strategic objectives in Russia, and our financial position and results of operations. Brussels and Washington have for long claimed that imposing further limits on Russian interests would help diffuse tensions in Ukraine, but that has only translated into a widening of Kiev's military campaign against pro-Russian rebels in the east. The latest offensive took place in Luhansk, where at least 5 civilians have been killed and 12 others wounded in Ukrainian artillery fire. Electricity, gas, and water supplies are totally cut off in the area. And although the government in Kiev has been extensively criticized by international human rights groups for indiscriminately targeting civilians, it seems that for the time being, Moscow and the pro-Russian separatists will bear the brunt of Western pressure.
A pioneering project in Kenya is helping tackle climate change, protecting wildlife and forests, and funding the fight against elephant poaching, all while benefiting local communities.
Another dead elephant in Kenya's Tsavo East National Park. As the government deploys more rangers, poachers here are using increasingly sophisticated methods to get around them.
We're also getting more money in the trade, and unfortunately that is fueling the use of more technologies that, such as, in South Africa they're using helicopters and night vision goggles. We're starting to see some of those things used here.
Poaching isn't the only problem here. Farmers and charcoal burners seeking short-term cash have devastated the land with decades of slash-and-burn agriculture.
Climate change is already having an effect here on the local communities. The whole Tsavo ecosystem is a very dry area, so water is always in short supply, but especially now with the effects of climate change, we see that droughts are prolonged, they're more frequent.
However, a pioneering UN-backed project set up by non-profit organisation Wildlife Works is helping prevent climate change and preserve the forests. Farmers can earn carbon credits to exchange for cash by conserving and replanting trees, supporting nearly 100,000 rural Kenyans. The money has helped support projects like tree nurseries as well as anti-poaching schemes.
It is the developed countries that are responsible for the mess. And we continue insisting as developing countries that they must take immediate and drastic steps to correct the problem.
In a deeply poor region, the project earns each person around $270 a year and helps them to see value in the environment. And as well as transforming the lives of the locals, it's hoped it will also protect those of the elephants.
All right, here's a recap of our top headlines. The Palestinian resistance group Hamas says that there will be no ceasefire until the Israeli siege on Gaza is lifted. The Israelis step up attacks against the Gaza Strip, killing over 125 civilians in less than 24 hours. And the leader of the Islamic Revolution in Iran calls for unity in the Muslim world in the face of Israeli aggression against Palestinians. Well, that's all from me and the Al Ittijah News team. Thank you for watching and good night.